Okay, everybody. Thank you very much for your patience. Let's get started. Just going to change my background. There we go. I like my crazy Mario. Okay, so welcome, guys. First off, I'll get started by saying don't worry about the homework from last week. I'm going to reassign it tonight, and I'll give you some additional time to do it. So, yeah, so don't worry, you guys won't be held responsible for that one at all. So let me get my slideshow out because we have a bit of, first of all, I just want to do some revision. Bring that one up. Okay, so last week we covered the overcoming the monster stereotype. So let's quickly go through my notes here. Who can describe the overcoming the monster stereotype for me, please? What happens in an overcoming the monster kind of story? So, an overcoming the monster story is a story about a protagonist or a hero who struggles to defeat uh, a monster, which is the antagonist, the bad guy. Now, remember, this monster can be either a real person or a monster, like Dracula or Frankenstein, or it can be a set of bad circumstances, like a natural disaster is going to destroy the world or something like that. So it's just a situation or a person or a monster that the hero needs to overcome. So, actually, let me have a quick look. I can find the whiteboards from last week.
Hello, teacher Michael.
Hello, welcome. Sorry, I've found the notes, but my PDF viewer is deciding to have a meltdown on me. Okay. My apologies, guys. All right. Again, my apologies, guys. My computer is not wanting to agree with me this evening. Okay, let's hope this works. Nope, it's deciding to freeze again. So remember when, excuse me, remember when we were discussing last week about the plot line or the general turn of events in an overcoming the monster plot line? So the first part we had, remember the anticipation. So this is where we get to, so this is where we kind of fill the audience in on the trouble that we are going to expect later in the story. We're building a bit of excitement here. And just remember, don't give anything big away too quickly. Make your audience wait for it. Build that excitement for them. Then we move into the dream stage. This is where we meet the hero and we see what they're capable of. The hero is aware they're going to have to fight the monster soon, but it's not a big problem yet. They may have had a dream about defeating the monster, and they know that this could soon be their reality. So they know it's coming, but it's not a big serious thing yet. Number 3, this is the frustration. So this is the next bit where we see the hero start to get ready to fight the monster, but their training hits a bit of a plateau. They're not going so well. They're getting quite frustrated. Everything seems hopeless. But remember, this is all due to a weakness that the hero has. Remember when we talked about last week, the movie Jaws? The bad guy is a giant shark in the water, and the good guy is a cop that is terrified of water. So that's the challenge he's got to overcome to beat the monster. So yeah, at this point, it just all looks like too much. The hero's not going to be able to do it. But they finally realize that they're going to need to beat this weakness to be able to beat the monster. Once that's happened, we move into the nightmare and the overwhelming challenge. So this is the part of the story where the hero fights the monster. There's just no, you just can't put it off anymore. It's got to be done now. During this point in the fight, the monster almost wins, but don't give up on the hero too soon, because we're about to head into the final part where it looks like all hope is lost. We move into death makes an appearance in the final moment. And this is the part of the story where the hero comes back against all odds and manages to overcome his problem and defeat the monster. It doesn't matter how strong or powerful a monster is, the hero overcomes them and they live, and the monster dies. It can be literally like they actually kill the monster, or it can be figuratively like they overcome the natural disaster that's going to threaten the world in our other example. So they complete the task, in other words. And right at the end of the story, this gives the hero what they really needed all along, and that was a reason to overcome their weakness. Because if you don't have a monster to kill, why do you need to overcome your weakness? If you don't have a challenge to beat, why then there's no point in getting better, is there? Nope, that is that. Okay, so we're going to be doing another breakout room thing later in the lesson as well, guys. This is going to be to plan out this week's story. So that was the revision from last week. So do we have any questions about that overcoming the monster plot before we move into the rags to riches? Excuse me, plot. Terrific, no problem. So let's get started. So the rags to riches plot. So welcome to week 3, guys. We've just revised our story structure from last week, the overcoming the monster type of story. So this week we'll be doing the rags to riches story. So we've got a few fun stories to talk about this week, and then we've got to get you guys back into the breakout rooms to plan your rags to riches stories. So the objectives for today. By the end of this lesson, we want to be able to understand the rags to riches plot archetype. We're going to explore the alternative versions of rags to riches, because I think there are about 5 or 6 different versions of the story, but we'll cover all of those. And they're all relatively simple. They all follow the same line. It might just be there's a certain point of the whole story that you're aiming to tell, but we'll talk about that later. And the third one, writing prompts and activities. This is the breakout room portion where you're going to plan your story out. Now, understanding the rags to riches plot. So first of all, the rags to riches story. Here we go. We're talking about stories like Cinderella or Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Do you guys know those stories, yeah?
Yes.
Cinderella. Beautiful. So we know that in the example of Cinderella, she's a stepsister that lives with her 2 stepsisters and her wicked stepmother. They're quite rich, but they treat her like a slave. They just, let her sleep in the basement and wear rags, feed off the scraps. Very hard life. Excuse me. But by the end of the story, she's fallen in love with the prince. She becomes a princess. And yes, she's got the world. She doesn't have to worry about money anymore. She's got her own kingdom now. So from rags to riches. So that is the rags to riches storyline. So can anybody else think of some rags to riches stories that you might have heard? Can you think of any? Raise your hand if you can think of any examples, guys.
Can you say again, teacher?
Pardon, do you have an example?
I cannot hear you.
Oh, that's not good. Can anybody else not hear me?
Teacher, I hear you, but like sometimes it's slack.
Does it kind of crackle in and out a bit sometimes? Oop.
Let me see.
Sorry, Lamb. I meant to send that to everybody, not just you. Good. So you guys can hear me. If worse comes to worse, we'll just have to make this recording available for you to watch after the class. But just try and keep up the best you can, because I don't think there's anything I can do about your being able to hear me, unfortunately. Let me try something. Is that any better? Correct. Yes, Tracy. Good question. So Tracy's just asked, do the words rags to riches mean poor to wealthy? Yes, it does. So rags to riches is an example of alliteration, which is where you have words that have the same sound at the beginning. So rags to riches. it sounds memorable because it's to very similar sounds. But yeah, so it does mean poor to wealthy. So, if nobody else can think of any other examples of rags to riches, I'll give you one more. Have you guys heard of, oh, Lamb, I see you with your hand up.
Rapunzel.
Rapunzel? Yes, very good. Very good. I had to think about that one for a second. So Rapunzel, she starts out locked up in a tower, rough life, no friends, not allowed to go anywhere, rescued by the prince. And again, she goes from living in a bad situation to living in a much better situation. She overcame her situation, overcame the odds. So I suppose as well as poor to wealthy, rags to riches can also mean going from a bad situation to going to a very good situation. So you've got two there. Now, we remember from the overcoming the monster category, we have 5 key parts. So we've got the expectation or the preparing people later in the story. We've got the part where we meet the hero, the part where it all seems hopeless. We've got the final battle where the hero's about to lose. And number 5, we've got the part where the hero overcomes the monster. Much the same, the rags to riches plotline actually has the same thing. So I'm going to share a whiteboard with you guys now, so that we can go through the parts of the rags to riches story. So, so much like the overcoming the monster storyline, the rags to riches story has 5 parts to it too. So let's go through those and explore them before we have a look at some of the other examples of some of the variations, sorry, of the rags to riches story. So, the first part of our rags to riches story is called The Initial Wretchedness at Home and the Call. So what this means is the initial wretchedness. So again, I can't type and write. Type it out and then discuss it.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so the first part that we have is called the initial wretchedness at home and the call. So the initial wretchedness just means, so initial is like the starting conditions or how it is at first. And wretchedness is just bad, unpleasant, not nice. So the initial condition, the beginning condition of our protagonist being in a bad situation at the beginning of the story, and the call. So this is the part of the story where we meet our protagonist or the main character and see the terrible situation they live in. So if you think about, we'll use Cinderella again here. Or actually, no, we use Charlie and the Chocolate Factory for this one. So I like that story. So we see at the beginning, Charlie Bucket, very, very poor, lives at home with his mum, dad, and 4 grandparents, tiny little shack. We see the yeah, and so we see that all the other kids can, they live good life or better lives than Charlie Bucket. And so we see the poor situation that he starts out in, or the initial wretchedness. And then he gets the call when he hears about the golden tickets that Willy Wonka is putting in his chocolate bars. So that is the initial wretchedness at home and the call. So does that part make sense to everybody? We need to see the bad conditions of our main character that they live in first. And the reason that's important is because this is a story of overcoming the odds or overcoming a bad situation. So we need to see our main character, we need to see them in their bad position first, or else we won't really care about when they make the change or they go from rags to riches. We won't care. So we need to see them in that initial bad position. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Awesome. Beautiful. Sorry, I just need to check because I know I can waffle on a bit, and so I want to make sure that I'm not just waffling. Okay, so part number 2 of the rags to riches story is out into the world with initial success. So we see our protagonist face some small struggles but they overcome them relatively problem-free. Our protagonists may have already met their prince or had their great idea and had some small victories that tell us great things are coming later. So we might stack up a few good things happening to our protagonist, maybe that, depending on your story, maybe they get a job relatively easy so they can start making money and live their life, or they might meet a friend that's going to help them later on in the story, but they start getting these small victories. Yes, Tracy.
Teacher Michael, what is protagonist mean?
So the protagonist is the main character of the story. So in Cinderella, Cinderella is the protagonist, or in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Willy Wonka's the protagonist because he's the main character. But yeah, so does everyone understand number 2? So our protagonist faces some small struggles, but they overcome them pretty easy. They beat the challenges pretty easy. Again, they may have already met their prince, or they may have already had the great idea that's going to lead to their success later in the book. And they generally have some small victories. So, things start going well for them. This lets us know that something big's going to come later in the story. But because our hero is still immature, or they're still in this first stage of themselves, they've yet to develop or overcome their weakness, perhaps. The victories don't last long because they're not the smart, mature person they will be later on in the story. So does that make sense to everyone?
Maybe.
Okay. So in the story of Cinderella, this is the part of the story where I'm trying to remember it. It's been a while since I've seen it, or read it. But this is the part of the story where Cinderella hears about the ball of the prince. Or actually, no, we were doing Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, sorry. So Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, this is the part where Charlie's heard about the golden tickets. He is out there in the world, looking excited for the tickets. He starts to rack up some small victories here or there, like, for example, on his birthday, all his family put their money together to buy him a bar of chocolate to try and get a golden ticket. So that's a victory. But his golden ticket doesn't, his golden ticket doesn't last. Oh, sorry, his chocolate doesn't have the golden ticket in it. So that's our hero hasn't matured yet. So the victories don't last long. Yes, he got the chocolate. No, he didn't get the ticket. Oh. So actually, sorry, I just described the next part of the story as well. So yeah, so with Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, this part of the story, out into the world with initial success, this would go all the way up to getting the chocolate bar for his birthday. Then in the central crisis, his ticket doesn't. Yeah, his ticket doesn't. Just having a brain blank this evening. My apologies, guys. So yeah, the central crisis, his birthday chocolate, no ticket. So that's where all of those victories start getting stripped away from him, like we were talking about. Okay, so part number 3, the central crisis. So this is the moment that a problem strikes in the story. It can be someone from the protagonist's past, so maybe an old enemy, or someone they think is a friend come back for revenge. It could be anything. Or the protagonist could just lose something important to them. But this is where all the victories are stripped away, and the protagonist seems like they just can't get out of this situation that they're in. So going back to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, again, this is where his birthday chocolate doesn't have a golden ticket in it. Their family's poor, so they're unable to get any more tickets. So it seems hopeless. Like there's nothing, nothing could go worse for him now because there's no golden ticket. Okay. So does everyone understand part 3?
Yes.
Terrific. Okay, so part number 4 is called The Independence and the Final Ordeal. So this is the part of the story when the protagonist realizes that they have to reach their goal by themselves. There's no more fairy godmothers, no more magic, no more genies, no more help. They've got to do it themselves. So they do it with style. The protagonist realizes their independence, and they prove to all of the haters and the naysayers, so people that tell them, nah, you can't do that, that's not going to work, or just people that are trying to stop their plan from working. They show them that they have what it takes to achieve their goal. There's still a final confrontation to overcome, but we all know how it ends. They're going to overcome it. So again, in the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory situation, this would be the part of the story where they're going on the tour of the... Oh, sorry. So he's found the ticket. He gets on the tour of the chocolate factory. And as everyone goes in, we see like Augustus Gloop falling into the chocolate river and getting stuck in the pipe. We see Veruca Salt eat the blueberry chewing gum, and I think she blows up into a big blueberry herself. Mike TV gets shrunk down, and Charlie and his granddad eat that gumball that makes them float. They nearly fly up into the fans. And then Willy Wonka's kind of like, yeah, no, not cool, and I was going to give you the chocolate factory, but not now. So yeah, that's where we are there, the independence and the final ordeal. So the final ordeal will be completed in the last part. But the point is, at this stage, we know that there's one final task to complete to reach their goal. Does everyone understand that?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Terrific. You guys are awesome. So finally, we have
Teacher Michael, is that the final? Is the final one?
yeah, so I'm just writing part 5 now, the conclusion of the story here. Okay, so the final union, the completion, and the fulfillment. So this is the part of the story where the protagonist wins. We're not talking about the fake victories from earlier in the story. Remember where we talked about they get some small victories, but they're not long lasting? This time they actually win. And this is where they get the prince or the kingdom, or they achieve the goal that they set out for themselves. So that is the rags to riches story. I'm going to save that. Okay, so that is the rags to riches story. Oh, I'll put the... Do you need the first page, Sunny?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so
Teacher Michael,
hello.
can I see the page number 2?
Of course you can.
Thank
Oh,
you.
you're very welcome. Okay, now just going to go back to sharing my screen for a moment. So now we're just going to have a quick look at we're going to have a quick look at the variations of the rags to riches storyline. So we mentioned that the rags to riches storyline is kind of the starting out in the poor situation, gets a bit better, something happens, and then they complete their goal. This is going to be a terrible drawing. So the standard rags to riches kind of goes poor starting condition. They get the call, they go out into the world, they have some success. then from the success, they have a few small victories, but it's short-lived because they're not mature enough yet. Now something bad happens. They go into their low point, but then they have the fourth part of the story, their moment of realization. And this is where they don't listen to the naysayers and they end up. So that's position 1, position 2, position 3, position 4 is on the way up, and position 5 is okay, so there's a little graph for you. Hopefully that makes sense. So we talk about the starting point. Things get a little bit better for the character when they get the call and they go out into the world with their little amounts of success. The victories are short-lived before they have the central crisis. Then things get really, really bad. But then they have that moment of realizing, I can do this. Like, this is going to happen for me. I can do this. I'm going to work for this. Things start to get better. They're about where they were in the beginning, but then they go all the way through up to number 5, where they complete the goal, and now they're on top of the world. Okay. So, like I was saying, we do have variations of the rags to riches story. So, we've got number 1. We've got rags to riches. That's the exact story that we've just talked about. Number 2, riches to rags. So we can do it the opposite way around. Maybe the character starts out with everything going for them. You know, they might be from a rich family, lots of money, best life imaginable. And then all of a sudden something goes horribly wrong and they lose it all. And they end up going from wealth to being poor. So you can do it the other way around as well. Next. So we might have a story as well about a fall and then a rise. So Hunger Games is a great example of that one. The story of Katniss. She has a fall where her sister gets chosen as the tribute, and she volunteers to take her place. So that's her fall because she's gone from situation being here to just really bad. She's fallen down. And by the end of the movie, she's won the Hunger Games and she's become a major celebrity who's going to be fighting for the people of her country. So we see her situation get much better by the end of it. So yeah, so rags to riches, let me just clear this up. Rags to riches and fall then rise are similar in the sense that it's kind of the same story arc relatively, but rags to riches is usually about like money and getting actually wealthy, whereas fall and rise is more about an event happening to the protagonist. So much the similar to rise then fall. So our protagonist in the beginning of the story has a great situation, but that doesn't last through uh, something of their own fault or something they couldn't even control. They just start on top. By the end of the story, they've just gone right down beyond. Yeah, they fall beyond where they started. So let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, if our character in a rise then fall starts at number 5. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So they start at number 5. Something great happens. They go up to number 10. They're riding high on top of the world, but then their fall takes them down to about 2 or 1. So they end up even worse than when they started. And all of these variations that we can write about, they've all got the same events as our rags to riches story. They might just be in a different order. Gosh, I can't count. That should be 4. So our next one is rise, then fall, then rise again. And actually, Cinderella is a great example of this story too, because she starts out lowly as the kind of like the slave child of the household. Things get good when she finds out about the ball and she gets invited. Also, she gets her dress ready. Then things go down again because her sisters destroy the dress. Then things go up again because her fairy godmother gets her to the ball. Then it go down again because she returns to her slave life until things end even better because the prince finally finds her. So we see how a story like that, it can go up and then down and then up and then down. So realistically, all of these stories are the same story. I just draw, I'll draw this little line here. So starts out okay, it gets good, it gets bad, 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 it gets good. So Sorry, guys, I'm just drawing out a diagram here to kind of show you how the same story path how all of these stories are set on the same path. They're just at different points of the story. From riches to rags. Okay. So if we have a look at this little diagram here, it won't make sense until I explain it. If we have a look here, we see the line starts in this default position here in the middle. It's not right up the top, it's not right down the bottom. So we see rags to riches, so red line to red line. So we start at the beginning, we get some initial success, we have a big fall, but we end up completing the task here. Riches to rags. It's kind of the opposite. It starts up, he loses it. That could be the story there. He may gain it back before we find out he's truly irredeemable and he loses it all again. Fall, then rise. So we start here. So we're in a positive point. We have a fall and then we rise back up. Rise, then fall. We start low down here. And we have our rise, then we have our fall. And then, of course, with the black one, rise, then fall, then rise. It's pretty much the same, but we have small victories, a defeat, more sincere victories. But unfortunately, they are due to fall again before they end up well. So you see, you can actually make a story out of just about any part of this because it kind of goes, starts average, something good, something bad, something good, something bad. Or we can do it the other way and go average, something bad, something good, something bad, something good. So really, you've got a lot of control over the type of story that you want to tell here. And we do have one more, but that's just the opposite of number 5, rise, then fall, then rise. It would be fall, then rise, then fall. So they start out good, they go bad, they get better, they go bad again. They get better one more time before they go bad for good. So you've got a lot of leeway there, or a lot of choice there in writing one of these stories, because that's how life goes. If you think about your life, you'll go through good days and bad days. So some days you might wake up nice and fresh, get up, brush your teeth, have breakfast, get dressed, go to school. It all goes off without a hitch perfectly. You're there early. Your teachers are in a good mood. There's no homework. Great day. That's like in the beginning here. You start out average and you go up. However, you might wake up the very next day. You might sleep through your alarm or your alarm doesn't go off. There's no hot water, so you can't take a shower in the morning. Or there's a problem with the water, so you can't brush your teeth. Maybe, things go wrong. You have a really bad day. Your teacher's in a bad mood, tons of homework, lots of assignments. Now, that is represented pretty much perfectly by the first couple of parts of this diagram. We started out and had a good day, then the next day it went bad. So your life is going to be filled with ups and downs. You're not always going to be super happy and the best ever. You're not always going to be super sad and like you just want to punch everything. You're going to go through all sorts of moods. And this story kind of reflects that. And that is why people like stories like this, because they can relate to it themselves. They have good days, they have bad days, and they like to see their own lives in these stories. So, right, I'm gonna make sure I have saved that. Boom. Okay, so those are the rags to riches story plots. So before we finish up today, what I would like to do is have you guys go into the breakout rooms again so that you can. Oh, hello, Ms. Duck. I only just realized you were there. But yeah, so you guys can plan your stories out in groups of 5 again, like last week. And so what I am going to do here. Okay, so just to kind of give you a basic process of how you should be, because I didn't do this last week and I should have, my apologies. But I'll give you a little tips on how to actually like storyline a story, because if you'd like to write like a real story, become a real writer, hopefully to get published one day, a lot of these little tips are going to help you. So by mapping out your story. So okay, so the first part you want to do is you want to decide what type of story you're going to tell. In this case, it's going to be your rags to riches story. The next part is you want to take a piece of paper or open a Word document, excuse me, and you want to write down, oh, hiccup, the 5 key parts of a rags to riches story on a sheet of paper and give each part equal space. So don't just go line 1, line 2, line 3. Divide your paper into 5 parts and give each part of the paper one of those headings. So number 3, and okay, so this next one is a big one. So, and I struggled with this personally for a long time. For a long time while I was creating, or when I was used to write stories when I was younger, I'd always start right from the beginning and try and write the story. Even if I was developing the plan, I'd always try and write the first part, then the second part, then the third part. But I found that my brain didn't really go in that order. But I thought because I wasn't planning the story in the order that I was going to write it, thought there was something wrong with how I was thinking about these stories, and I began to get really frustrated. And then one day I just decided, well, let's just plan the story and see what happens. So I started trying to write the beginning, but I had a whole bunch of ideas for the middle part of the story. So I just went and wrote them all down. And then I thought, how could we get into those situations? Wrote the previous bit. What happens after? Write the next bit. And so you don't have to plan these stories in order. Also, sorry, write the plan in order from beginning to end, but you don't have to work through the story that way while you're planning it. If you get a good idea for near the end, write that down in the section for near the end of the story. And then if you get a sudden good idea about, I'd like to do something with, I don't know, dragons in the beginning of the story, write that up in the beginning section. So that's an important one, because if you try and write it through idea for idea, you're gonna sacrifice a lot of probably some of your best ideas you'll have if it's, oh, I didn't think about it at the right time. So that's important. And once you do have all 5 sections, or however many sections of your story there need to be, once you've got all of those, then you can make them fit. So you can look at it and go, well, in the beginning, I don't know, in the beginning, he goes to the zoo and sees the tigers, and that gives him this idea. But how do we get that to him deciding that the superhero wants to base, the animal he wants to base his superhero on is now a lion instead? How do we get there? So that's where you start to fill in the blanks and kind of fix any continuity errors. So if you read your plan and it just doesn't make sense from one bit to the next, that's where you want to think about, how do I get these bits to connect? Can I get them to connect as they are? Do I need to change one of the bits? Do I need to change the other, or both of them? So yeah, so when you're planning these stories, it's really a backwards and forwards kind of thing. It's not just a start at the start, finish at the finish kind of activity. And the last one is, even if you're writing like a superhero story or a science fiction story about crazy technology that we don't have now, try and make your story relatable. So, so maybe the devices that they use in the future operate similarly to the devices that we use now, so that people can imagine the characters using these devices or these things. Maybe it's just how the characters are feeling emotionally, how they relate to each other, how they get along. That the audience may be connecting to, but just make the story relatable in one way or another. So does that make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Terrific. Okay, so
Teacher,
yeah,
can you back to the where you put the keys? I want to check something.
where I put the what?
The 5 keys part.
Yeah. So do you want to
Here.
start?
Okay.
Do you need number 5 yet?
No, not this. The next one. Teacher,
Yeah.
the key number 5.
Key number 5. Cool.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I'm going to plan, I'm going to put you guys in your breakout rooms now. I'll give you 15 minutes in there. And in that time, take the notes that you've got now about your rags to riches story and work with your group to define the, to plan these rags to riches stories out. So it doesn't have to be super detailed, but you just want to have a general idea about what are your characters doing, what's the story about, how are we going to get to the end of the story. So does anyone have any questions about the task before we begin? Actually, shake that. I am going to remove I'm going to remove the time limit, and it's just as soon as you have finished your, as soon as you've finished your story plan, you've finished for the night. So I'll post your homework in the Zalo groups now while you guys are in your breakout room. So try to get it done obviously nice and quickly. You don't want to be taking too long. But yeah, just make sure you're planning out your stories with your group. But then when you've finished your story with your group, or finish your story plan with your group, your homework task will be to write this story by yourself. So you're going to kind of plan the story with a group, but you're going to write the actual story by yourself. Because I'll be very interested to see how a group of 5 people with the same kind of plan, how differently their stories end up being, even though they're based off the same kind of storyline. So that's the task. As soon as you've finished your storyboards, you can go, and I'll post the homework in the Zalo group while you're in the breakout rooms, guys. So thank you very much for a great